Hetal, thank you so much for joining us at the Open Banking Expo. You had a very good session where you shared some of the learnings of HSBC pioneering open banking solutions in your market. What I'd like to do is spend a few minutes now just to kind of go through some of the more detailed points in your presentation. So I'll start off with my first question, which is that what were some of the advantages realized by HSBC as one of the first to the CMA9 out of the gate in adopting open banking in your market?
Yeah, I think there's probably three things. One is propositionally, we have now got a reasonable point of view based on real customer feedback as to what's interesting and what's not. Because what you've got to remember is open banking is an exchange between the customer and whichever partner firm they use. I'm choosing to let you have access to my data. It's all by choice. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen is that for some propositions, engagement wanes, and in other cases, we continue to see customers staying engaged and using the service, and that's so important. And I think there'll be a lot of commonality between what we see in the UK and Europe and some of the other markets coming soon after. We're also now live in markets in Asia Pac as well, and again we'd expect to see some commonality in behaviour, both with UK and Europe, but potentially more between the markets themselves, because there are differences in people's attitude to confidentiality and sharing of data between different regions, and we know that. I think the second advantage we've had is we've had time to build, scale and optimise our technology stack. Any architect can design for you a platform that enables high quality APIs to be shared, but what's built is never quite the same as what they said. And that's no less true of digital architects as it is of physical architects. And often there's a little bit of additional work needed to really fine tune and make the thing hum. And we've been through that process now. And as you saw from my comments yesterday, we're at quite some scale now, and that's important. I think the third area is really around the end-to-end operating model. This is a new service, and so what's required to effectively manage third parties, whether they're regulated or commercial, doesn't really matter. How do you deal with customer complaints and similar things which naturally arise? You know, that's something that takes time to build out and learn experientially, and we've had the benefit of being able to go up that curve.
Great, thank you. You did mention during your presentation that you have been working with some partners, for example, Equifax, Consents Online, but could you share some of the benefits that you realized by working through these the partners?
Yeah, I think put in a nutshell, it's enabled us to move much faster at much lower cost with much less risk. And HSBC as a firm likes to build things for itself because we've got such an unusual footprint operating in multiple markets. We often see real benefits in building for ourselves because then you can move things from market to market where there's real value for customers, and often partners don't follow us. That's just the nature of being a reasonably large firm. Mm-hmm. But in this case, as is often the case with innovation which starts in one place, we found it much more effective to build partnerships and then move at pace, test and learn and iterate with those partners. And I think that's something we'll carry on doing. At a certain point as a large firm, there's often benefits in building yourself and owning things so you can just bring down the cost of running. But I think we're still some way off from doing that. I think at this stage we're still excited and looking to innovate and try out new things as fast as possible.
Great, thank you. And I think that kind of leads into another question I have. As a large firm yourself, what would you say would be some of the learnings specifically that you could share with the large Canadian banks to take full advantage of the opportunity?
Yeah, I think number one, you've got to have a design and a standard that's put together with the right stakeholders around you. So what I think the UK open banking entity did very well was it brought fintechs and consumer representatives into the room, and we had an open conversation about what should the consent journey look like, what should the trust framework look like, what should the data elements within the standard be. And on every front, I'm sure you change things now if you can go back, because that's life when you're pioneering and doing something new. But by having the conversation as a collective with all three parts of this triangle in the room together, I think you get to an answer that's more sustainable and likely to endure. And there are inherent tensions, and often those tensions actually sit between customer representatives and the fintech representatives. As a fintech, my priority is to create a very slick and frictionless user experience, whereas the customer representatives quite rightly wanted customers to be fully sighted on what they're sharing, how long it's being shared for, what it's going to be used for, which other parties might receive that, which all of which adds some friction to a journey, though it must do. And there's an interesting tension there, because we know that if you make user journeys too cumbersome and you share too much, customers disengage and become frustrated. On the other hand, if you don't explain in a transparent fashion what's being done, that will lead to problems further down the road as customers feel let down. So finding that happy marriage of what does good look like, and trialing it, going through an industry set of user testing processes, so we could agree on iconography, language, and some of the other core components to then create what's a reasonably standardised set of experiences, so that customers, regardless of which of the major banks they work with, can expect a high quality experience. And we felt that was, rather than having a competitive model where each firm does its own thing, we felt a relatively consistent model would engender trust in the ecosystem.
Very insightful. Thank you for sharing that. And if we were to switch over to challenger banks, and you mentioned in your presentation that in Canada, HSBC is a challenger bank. So from that point of view, what would be some of the learnings you could share with this specific segment of the market? There's a few challenger banks that are signed up to listen to your session, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say our experience, particularly on the credit use case that I described, is immediately transferable to a challenger brand. So we know, because of customer inertia, that checking accounts can be quite slow to move. Market shares move slowly, and customers are perhaps, in many cases, a little laid back about the benefits of moving. And that therefore then creates a market environment where the large checking account banks appear to have an advantage. And sometimes that's real, sometimes I think it's more optical. But nonetheless, when you can export your data directly from your checking account holding bank to another lender, the benefits have been completely neutralised, and you can now compete on an entirely level playing field. And that's got to be a good thing from a challenge bank's point of view. It's got to be a good thing from a customer's point of view. If I simplify the credit journey, then hopefully as a customer, I'm able to access credit that's more tailored to my specific needs, whatever that might mean. It might be the tenor, it might be the repayment profile, it might be some other features of the loan and the pricing structure that are relevant to me. And secondly, I'm probably going to get a better price. That's what shopping around does for us. That seems to be a good thing from a consumer perspective.
For sure,
I'd say that's probably the single biggest thing.
Thank you. So, Hetal, you're in a pretty enviable position, one would say, leading HSBC's open banking readiness and framework across HSBC's entire global footprint. And through that, you've come across different models in different jurisdictions. What would you say? I'd love to know about your thoughts around the best way forward for Canada. A regulatory-led approach or an industry-led approach? based on
Yeah.
your experience through the different jurisdictions.
Yeah, so you've gone straight with the third rail of this conversation, haven't you? Let's see where we go. So as a firm, we have thought about this a lot, because I think our initial preference would have been for something more market-led. What we've learned through the journey we've been on, and as you saw from my slides yesterday, getting on towards 20 markets now, is there are some clear benefits in having a regulatory framework. Number one, I think it's an enabler, and it enables, in particular, a very clear understanding of what good looks like. Data protection is a key theme in every major market. It's certainly a key theme in Canada. And it's important from a bank's point of view to know that if you are choosing to share data, you're doing so in a way that is fully meeting any set of expectations that legislators and wider society may have for you, or have of you rather. And I think the second piece is it's about roles and responsibilities. One of the things that the European core legislation has done really well in Europe is set out very clearly what obligations a customer has, the fintechs, and then the banks. And that understanding roles and responsibilities across that triangle is important, because at the end of the day, one of the risks you always have in banking is that banks are well capitalized large institutions, and so if things go wrong, we're often the parties that get sued. And in a structure where the banks are being asked to share information with other less regulated entities, that doesn't seem like a fair trade. So by having a regulatory framework which sets out what your obligations are and what your responsibilities are within this overall ecosystem, you protect your well-capitalized financial institutions from future allegations that they perhaps could have done things better and didn't take enough care. Because the world is uncertain. So I think there's some real value there from a risk perspective. I think there's also value from a customer perspective in setting out what the responsibilities of all parties are. In a pure market-led model, the risk is that customers will have uncertain outcomes and poor outcomes in some cases, and they won't have anyone clear to hold to account. Whereas in a regulated framework, what we're seeing is customers can go to, in the UK, it's the Financial Ombudsman Service, to raise a complaint about a fintech, just the same as if they're unhappy with the service HSBC has provided. So there's a set of protections and benefits there which I think are really important. I think the thing you have to then weigh against that, and this is where, as a large firm, we operate in many markets, we're very aware that there is a political and cultural context that varies by market. It's not for HSBC to comment on that. We're guests in any market we operate in, and we have to learn from that and fit into that. And so if there's a market where there's a stronger focus on market-led and private sector-led initiatives, then it's about trying to find a happy medium which provides the benefits of a regulated framework, but without perhaps it being fully managed in the way that the UK has been. And I think there is a middle ground. You can have enabling regulation and legislation, but then leave the industry to then, within that space, solve the problem. And that feels like a model that might be relevant in Canada. And we've seen a range of different options out there. We're now working in Singapore, Australia, UK, France. There's live activity for us in open banking in Hong Kong, our other home market. And these are all very, very different cultures. They're very different in the way that they tend to create requirements of the financial services industry. And therefore you have to accept there will be a spread of options. But it's about trying to find the one that meets the requirements locally in the market, I think. And you have to then go back to the Finance Canada work, which sets out what they're trying to achieve in doing this. So I'd say a policy-led approach which defines the outcomes, has enabling regulation which makes it a safe and level playing field for all participants, and then potentially the market developing standards and some of the lower level implementation artifacts may feel like the right answer.
Great, thank you. And nothing third rail about that question. You handled it really well.
Yeah, thanks for throwing that one at me.
So, I mean, it's a really key point that this market is grappling with right now. So the insights you shared were, I think, right on the mark. So thank you for that. So let me just ask this question. You've been through a lot with the open banking journey at HSBC, and you probably might have some scars to show for it. If you were to start the whole journey again tomorrow, what would you say to your future self?
Well, that's a really tough question. I think plan for the single biggest lesson we've had from an internal perspective, I think, is planning for scale. As is often the case in life, when you're doing something that is uncertain, you build a plan and a set of assumptions that enable you to kind of move things forward. And this was entirely greenfield for us when we first started. So we had a set of assumptions around likely scale and adoption. And with hindsight, I think if we'd anticipated greater scale, greater speed expectations, more partners in the ecosystem, I think we may have set ourselves up even better than we did, because trying to retrofix for some of that was quite complex. And the more you get right first time, the easier any product is, right? That's life. I think the second thing is to look outside the industry for talent. There is a scarcity of talent in this space. I commented on it yesterday, and I think that will continue to be a challenge for us because we are competing with almost every other industry globally. I think COVID has accelerated the move to digital across many industries. We've seen that in every market. Some things that were happening anyway have been accelerated by 2, 3, 4 years because we've all had to rely on digital services to such an extent. And that then has further sharpened, I think, the resourcing challenge in finding really talented people in the digital space. And there are many, many of them, but if the entire economy is digitising at the same time, that's going to create scarcity, right? So I think that's a second learn, is really making sure you find and nurture talent in this space.
Thank you for that. And again, thank you so much for your candid responses to certain questions that were, I think, easy and some that were hard. So thank you for that. And I would say also thank you for bringing and sharing your expertise with the Canadian audience, because we are really at the point where we are deciding how to move forward. The last 6 months with COVID accelerated the need for and the need to reduce branch networks for fulfillment services. The use case you mentioned about what HSBC has done with regards to mortgage deferrals using open banking was excellent. So again, thank you very much, Hetal, and I hope you enjoy the rest.
Thank you, Yasser. It's been a pleasure being here.